Good afternoon. We'll start this afternoon's business with the submission of Mr. Roger Lundie. Mr. Lundie, how would you like to proceed?
I'm rather nervous at public speaking, so I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation to help me.
Yes.
Can you see that?
We've already received that.
Okay.
Yes. Had a good look at that.
And I've got some notes here I'll try and read off, but if you want to interrupt anywhere through it, I'm quite happy with that, because it might make it easier for me.
Well, just be relaxed about it, because
it's easy for you to say.
We've read your material and we're interested to know what you've got to tell us. And, you know, we're not here to judge you, far from it. But we just want to hear and understand what you've got to tell us, and you proceed in your own way and feel comfortable about it.
Okay. I'm going to go now. Yeah.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. I'm Roger Lundie, and this submission is about my irrigation setup and how a couple of rule changes mean that in the future I will be placed on 98% restrictions compared with the irrigation I've done over the last 6 seasons. This is just a Canterbury map that I got off the internet, and I've marked on it the three properties that I own.
Yes. 2
are on the Clay Downs, the ones to the south, and the one that we're going to talk most about is up beside the Kanawha River, about 1 kilometre from the Kanawha River.
Thank you.
Prior to 1994, I had on 2 occasions drilled 3 wells on my home block, which is one of the Clay Down blocks, and looking for water. These went down to about 30 metres each, and none of them showed any sign of any water. So when they started talking about the Apua Dam in 1994, I purchased 64 shares of they were called Skifa shares then, so that I could in the future I could irrigate from the water that they promised to put in the headwaters of Tanawai. That was between 1994 and 1996, and then after the Apua Dam got going, they changed their mind and they didn't supply us with any water as they promised, and I really feel it was just a cunning scheme they had to get more starter finance at the beginning. So in 2001, I started looking at building my own, constructing my own irrigation scheme on my block that's nearest the river. This just shows the general direction. We've actually over time built 3 galleries on this block, and the blue arrow or purple arrow just shows the general direction that the water is flowing under my block. This is a bit closer, and the black line that's running parallel with Cross Road there is shows where I built the first gallery, and I'll talk more about digging the gallery when I build the next 2, because I don't have any photos from when I built the first one. The first one is 207 metres long, 7 metres deep, and the midpoint, according to ECAM, is 1,100 metres from the Tanawai River. When I built it, ECAM pointed out to me that I had to be able to show, for my own benefit, that I was not connected to the river. So they advised me to contact Bob Hall, who is a engineer or water engineer or something here in Timaru, and he did the maths, and he worked out that I was 2.6 litres per second was what I was doing. That's how much I was affecting the river. And anything under 5 litres a second was counted as having no effect on the river, and which meant we didn't go on restrictions. So that was called the 30-day rule that he used, and so I could irrigate whenever I wanted, and everything was fine. Except when we dug the gallery, we went down, as I said, we went down 7 metres, and we hit a white siltstone. And we just laid the bottom along the siltstone with a slight slope in it to the southern end where we built our well. When we first hit water and they pumped it out, there seemed to be tons and tons of water. But as time went on, we only really had enough to do one of the 6 paddocks in that block. So there was definitely not 15 litres a second. Originally, this is looking towards the one on the left is where I had a diesel pump pumping the water out of the gallery, and the diesel pump was behind that blue diesel pump. The gallery well was behind the blue diesel pump, and what happened was we'd turn the thing on, it would suck down, probably suck all the water out of the gallery, and then it'd turn off, and we'd have to come and do it all over and over again. So in 2004, I think it was, I got permission to build a small pond at the end of the gallery. So the water, instead of sucking it out of where the diesel pump was, I sucked it out of beside the pond, and that meant I could turn it on. It might last 12 hours or something, then it would turn off, and that means I had more. I could catch more of the water that was flowing past. I think that's it. Right, as I said, we were getting hardly any water, and we decided, so in 2007, we decided to dig a second gallery. And also that year, we enlarged the pond from where it was, and we paid to get electricity brought to the site, so it did away with the diesel motor. Now, one of the problems I felt with the first gallery was the fact that its base was on top of the siltstone. In other words, we didn't dig into the siltstone, we just went along the top with a slight slope towards where the well was. This had the effect that once I pumped out the well, the pump switched off, then the well and gallery soon filled up again, and the natural flow of water continued again underground. Building the small pond at the end of the gallery in 2004 did help. When the second gallery was built, I persuaded the contractor to dig the base of the gallery down a metre into the siltstone. I felt that if the water level got really low, then this might capture a great proportion of the underground flow. And now we're at the stage where I had a digital camera, so as I'd never heard of a gallery before, let alone seen one, I've just got a few slides to show you what involves in digging a gallery, and then I'll get on to the problems of today.
Thank you.
Is that right? Yeah. The second gallery was probably 150, no, maybe 200, well over 200 metres in length. First of all, the digger goes down and takes the top 3 or 4 metres off and dumps it on one side, and then he goes along gets down into the hole and digs the second one out, which is what you can see him doing there. You can't actually see the siltstone, but you will in the next 2 or 3 photos. Because when you dig into groundwater like this, is this massive water, well, hopefully a massive water, he has a blue pump there, which is going 24 hours a day, keeping the water down to help so they can see what he's doing when he's doing this digging. This is a view. This is actually in the middle of the paddock. This shot, and although the white pipe is on angle, that's because my camera's on angle, and you put a pipe down like that, you put boulders around it, and those slits you see in it are done with a chainsaw, so the water can flow in from the gallery into the well pipe. And the next one just shows you there's not much. Every stream we struck is very, very, very small, and this gives you an idea of how much water you get flowing out of a stream when you strike it. And if the white stuff you're seeing down the bottom is the siltstone, and that's a very, very small flow from one of the little tiny streams we had. But all the little tiny streams all add up. That is going from the middle of the paddock to northwards towards near one of my boundaries, and then we went around the corner about another 20 or 30 metres. And the next one, if you have a look on the side, you can see the white siltstone on the right-hand side, and you can see the little tiny streams making all the ripple effects as you go along. Once you've dug it all out, the next thing is to put Novaflow, which is what they use for draining land. We put a Novaflow pipe right along to the pump, and then you purchase some boulders, clean washed boulders, and they go in next. And I'm also going to say about with this photo, you can see sorrel and you can see woolly mullein there. The sorrel is the red stuff, the woolly mullein is the leafy stuff, and so this paddock has never ever been never been irrigated in its life, and the only reason it's green is because took a photo in the spring. And the fact that you've got sorrel probably needs a bit of lime as well, and it needs water. Here's a photo of them putting the boulders into about 1 metre or so deep on top of you can see he's gone down 1 metre in the siltstone, so he's probably almost got 2 metres of boulders there on top of the Novaflow pipe. And in this one, then finally, if you have a look at the right down the bottom there, we've put plastic over the boulders, and then he starts filling the whole thing back in. And another one of these 600 metre pipes goes on top of the white pipe, and then all you can see today, this is just taken the other day, is the second pipe coming out of the ground, and everything else is filled back in. And the water is from there pumped back into my pond that was at the end of my first gallery. And we now have a look at the first gallery again, with the pond, and we actually, that same year, 2007 I think it was, we enlarged the pond so it could take more. So the white pipe is the water arriving from the second gallery. It is there mixing with the water from the first gallery, and it's been pumped out with the galvanised pipe. And then we get to, this is the highest I ever saw the water in my pond that I had at that stage, and that's all because of the height of the groundwater at the time. It's not very far below the surface. It's the highest I ever saw it. But that's not because I pumped into it, that's just natural. Then, where am I up to? I lost it. Anyway, we then built a third gallery, which is in the northeast corner, and it was only about 100, 120 metres long. And in this one we put the wellhead beside the boundary so that it wasn't in the road, because the first one is in the middle of the paddock and it's always in the road. And the water is coming basically from the left-hand side and flowing across. So hopefully we've caught most of the water that is flowing across as it flows across. Right, after I did the second gallery, I had enough water to irrigate 4 of the 6 paddocks that were down there. And after I did the 3rd gallery, I was able to irrigate the total lot. I now have 24K lines down there, so I've actually split all the paddocks up, so they're actually 22. There are actually 22 small paddocks there, each with 1K line in the middle. And so there are 12 shifts to each K line. Sorry. Oh yes, and then to make matters easier, we decided to. Oh no, this is the enlarged pond again, and you can just see hiding behind the wattle there, a digger ready to make big changes, and that's because yeah. Right, I'm jumping around. You're not getting it all, I'm sorry.
Just carry on. It's quite all right. You just tell us the things you'd like to tell us.
Okay. ECAN in 2014 said that they wanted to be able to measure my total amount of water I was extracting. I knew how much I was using because the irrigation pump, the electric irrigation pump, had a meter that I recorded every day, so I knew how much I was using. But they wanted to know how much I was extracting. So what we did was we got the digger in, and he filled that pond in probably about to about 4 metres from the ground level. And we then built on top of that, we built a pond. So this is taking basically the same spot, but we've filled in the pond we had, and we've and put a large lined pond in its place. And as you can see, we had to have a meter. The white box at the back is the meter that measures the flow of the 3 galleries joined together coming into the pond, and the water goes out in the white pipe that is nearest us, and the pump is under the electric pump is under the corrugated iron cover. And this was all done so that ECAN could measure how much we were taking. So see, we didn't go over 15 litres a second, and right. Yeah. Every day when I shifted my K lines, even before this was done, I measured the level in my wells, each of my 3 wells, and I like to envisage that I had a huge pond of water underneath me, and I tried to get tried to take as much as I could, but not my 15 litres a second, out by opening up the gate valve or closing the gate valve each day to try and get as much as possible, but getting the level go down as slowly as possible. And so I've got all the records of all the wells every day that I shift the K lines, and yes, and I definitely wasn't going over 15 litres a second, I know that. Normally in a season I start off about, well, the first week's very hard, but after you get everything set again, right, it usually starts off about 11 or maybe get up to 12. It's very, very rarely I ever get up to 14 litres a second. And I think this season at the moment I'm at 11.7 is where I am, and I've been going about almost 2 weeks. Yes, right. Well, I'll just read what I've got here. While my water right allows me to extract up to 15 litres a second, it is extremely rare for me to get near this amount. Normally there are times in the season, usually near the start, where it is in the 11 to 13 litre a second range. and very occasionally it gets up to 14. Then other times it eases down to 8 or 9 litres a second, and 1 year it got down as low as 4 litres a second. So I finally had my irrigation well set up to the best use of the water. I finally had my irrigation system well set up to best use the water I had available. Over the years, I have spent a total of $465,000 on irrigation capital expenditure. Up to this point, all I've really done is offer you a brief introduction to my irrigation scheme. Now I am starting to get the reason that we are here today. I thought everything was going well until ECAN decided to introduce their Plan 7 changes. It turns out that these proposed changes will have a catastrophic effect on my irrigation scheme. 2 years ago, I made a number of submissions to the OTOP committee and really heard nothing back. Last year, I updated what I had written written to the OTOP committee and sent it to us as a submission to ECAM, which is what we're hearing today. For today's hearing, I have slightly altered that submission, basically adding another year's data, and there's a few slight alterations I made. So you've got the original Plan 7 changes.
Yes, we have both of them, and you've made the amendments very clear, so we can easily identify which are the up-to-date parts.
As I have just said, all was well until about 2 years ago when ECAM started discussing their Plan 7 changes. I'm repeating myself. In 2018, I went to 3 workshops, one run by the OTOP committee. The message I received was that they felt that in the times of low flow in the Tanawai, they were looking at bringing in restrictions at a higher flow rate, going from the current minimum of 400 litres per second to 475 and then to 550 over time. To try and impose these restrictions on more people than there were being affected at the moment, for those with groundwater tanks, which is me, they talked of keeping the 5 litre a second depletion rate, but working this out over 150 days rather than the 30 days that they use at the moment. They're still using it at the moment. So to recap, as long as the extraction rate of water is not affecting the flow of the river by 5 litres per second or more, the well is deemed to be not connected. Such a well will not be put on restrictions if the river flow is low. In 2001, Bob Hall, that was the consultant I was told to use, ECAN told me to use, estimated my flow would alter the river by 2.6 litres a second, and the ECAN investigating officer estimated it would be 3.3 litres a second. This was using the 30-day rule. So that I could get an idea of what the results would be using the 150-day rule, I asked Dan Clark from ECAN, and he suggested that I download the program, the Thesis Jenkins solution, from the ECAN website. He suggested I use the figures of, well, I'll get onto that in a minute. So that's the program I downloaded, I was told to download, and this is a better view of it. And up the top you'll see some, first two, all that's in blue is what you can alter. So the top two, he's recommending I put in 1,000 and 0.1, and that's the same. I looked up Bob Hall, and that's the same as he used. And the ECAM used the 0.1, but they had a slightly different figure for their transmissive, or whatever it is, up the top. So you then put in your 15 litres a second, and you can work out how much you're affecting the river. And I worked it out at over 150, over 30 days, I worked out I would be affecting the river by 2.7 litres a second. Bob Hall worked it out at 2.6, and ECAM estimated at 3.3. So those are all less than 5 litres a second, and it shows that I was working the program correctly. But the important thing for today is at 150 days, the 15 litres a second would lower the river by 8.1 litres a second, which would mean I would be then connected to the river, and I would have to go on restrictions when everybody else went on restrictions. I then wanted to see what exactly what the river flows were. So I got 4 years data. Dan Clark very kindly sent me 4 years data from the cave flow meter, where the Tanawa is measured daily, and I've just put a wee on you've got the data on one side, you've got the cave figures on the next column, and my figures off my daily, what I daily read from the ECAM flow meter are there. And during that period, that 2 or 3 week period, I've put the month of February in 2019, I've got there were 2 periods when I would have been put on restrictions because the flow was below, in cave was below 0.550. So I got a 3-day period of restrictions and a 4-day period of restrictions. So if and then I went and did it for each season. So in this season, which I've got here, which is the 2015-16 season, there would have been, I think, 10 periods when I would have been on restrictions. And so I then used the Thesis Jenkins stream depletion tool, I think that's the right word, tool again, and I was able to show on the very short period of restrictions, I would have no effect at all on the river. There was one period of 10 days when I would have affected the river by 0.21 litres a second, and another one of 20 days when I would have affected the river, added back to the river, 1.13 litres a second. So none of these are anywhere near the 5 litres a second, which is the crucial figure that everyone works on. There were actually 3 periods that were over 1 litre a second. There was, in this one here, there's a 1.13. There's another one in 2019 of 1.54, and there's a third one in, I think it was 2014-15, 2.1 litres, 8 litres a second. So I'll just go and have a look at, if you put your 2.18, oh, I can't see it. I'm afraid my eyesight's not the best. Using the flow rates that was actually happening at the time, I haven't got, yes, no, I haven't got it. Using the flow rates that I actually had at the time and putting it in, there's a period of restrictions of 75 days where the blue arrow is pointing, and that would, so you multiply whatever your flow rate was at the time, and which was 5.58 litres a second, for 75 days, you multiply by the 39% where the arrow is pointing, and I can work out the lows. If I had been taking water from the river at that rate, at 2.18, I would be affecting the river by 2.18 litres a second. So I've assumed that if I've stopped taking water at that rate, I would be adding 2.18 back into the river that I wouldn't be taking out.
Mr. Lundie, you've done a splendid job in explaining the background to your proposal.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for that. And I'm wondering whether you've reached the point now of whether you'd like just to explain to us what your proposal is.
Well, I've got
it on the text there.
Will I rush through the next couple of slides, or will I just shoot onto that?
You can choose.
All right. All right.
But I feel that I've got a grasp of what the problem is, and I know that you've got a proposal.
Yeah, well, I think it's about 2 or 3 slides away. Can I carry on?
Yes, of
Yeah.
course.
Up here, basically, a summary of the change of the rules to the 150-day rules. For the last 6 seasons, I have been deemed to be not connected to the river using the 30-day rule. Over these 6 seasons, I have irrigated on a total of 684 days, which is an average of 114 days per irrigation season. Using the 150-day rule, this would deem me connected, and I would have to go on restrictions of 301 days out of the 684. In other words, I would have to be placed on restrictions 44 days of the year, where I would have irrigated over the last 6 years. The really galling thing about all this is that because I am so far from the river, putting me on restrictions can be shown to have absolutely no effect on the river, flow of the river, at the critical 5 litres per second level. So it seems to me all to be a rather pointless exercise. And now, I thought I had problems going from no restrictions to 44% restrictions. Little did I know that is nothing compared to what was to come next. The second problem, apparently I'm classed as a BN extractor, and this has terrible ramifications. A BN extractor is someone who got their water permit after 1996, and I got one in 2001, and an EN is a person who doesn't have a per shares, and I don't have a per shares. I did have a per shares. I had 64 of them, and when I had them, they were promising us to bring water down the river, the Tanoa River, and they reneged on that promise. So on 2001, I started doing this development I've talked about. In 2002, Apua it was now called Apua, not Skeefers. Apua wanted the shares back so they could on-sell them to other farmers who didn't have shares, who could get the Apua water. So, yes, it was actually Dan Clark pointed out to me that being an extractor, Dan Clark, has terrible ramifications. So, if you're a BN extractor on the Tanawa, you can only use Tanawa water when the river is not basically in flood, but almost in flood, at 2,500 litres a second, whereas all the other figures are based on they're 400 litres a second now, and it's going to go up to 550 litres a second, but now that I would be on restrictions at 2,500 litres a second. So I'm rushing, I'm going as fast as I can. So I've just chosen a bit to show you. There's a 43 days period here where I extracted water in February 2016. And only one of those days would I have been allowed to irrigate. And if you have a look at all the seasons, over the 6 seasons, I actually irrigated in 684 days, and with the new rules, I would only be able to irrigate on 16 of those days, which is an average of 2.67 days per season. In other words, I would put on 97.7% restrictions. Am I going faster now? What an absolute disaster. So I have a future of 97.7% water restrictions, extraction restrictions to look forward to. Yes, I must admit that this is far worse than the 44 restrictions, 4% restrictions I initially worked out. And Dan Clark was correct. I've gone from what the ECAM investigating officer called having a minor effect on the flow of the river to being placed on 97.7% restrictions. The big question I had then was, is there a way out of this mess? So then I started to look at the calculation of the 30-day rule and the 150-day rule. Now, there's a couple of corrections I want to make, but I think we'll skip them because you want me to keep going. But basically, I'm just saying, originally I worked out my distance from the river just the first gallery. Because I built 2 galleries, I'm actually a bit closer. My centre point is a bit closer to the river. So I've now, from the rest of my calculations, I've used the midpoint of 1,100 litres per second. Whereas before I was using a wee bit less than that. 1,100 metres, what do I say? 1,100 metres per second, as distance. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Just metres?
Yeah, just metres, yeah.
Yes.
I'm getting all flustered.
No, just take your time. Don't get flustered. I'm keen to understand your proposal.
All right, well, we're just about there. Right, what have I got this one here for? Oh, yeah, this is just fixing it up. In my original submission, I worked it out that I had to go down to 9.25 litres per second to be not connected. Changing the distance slightly, I now have to go down to 8.9 litres per second. So I've just in case anyone tries to pick holes in it, I've thought I'd better put that correction in there. Now, this is a summary, which is in the submission only. In my submission, I've got the figures for my irrigation meter as well. Well, I've taken them out just so I can make the figures bigger. So this is using the ECAM meter. I read at the beginning and the end of each season, the total flow at that stage. And so the fourth column, the seasonal total, gives how much water I've used in that season in cubic metres. Then from my daily records, I worked out how many days I was actually irrigated, and the season length, which was from the first day I irrigated to the first day I extracted to the last day I extracted. And then I divided these through, and where the figure was, the season length was less than 150, I used 150. So the fourth one down, I've used 150 days, and so for the 150 days, I extracted water at an average rate of 5.65, and the same applies to the sixth one. It was 7.33, because those two were both less than 150 days. For the others, I've used the actual length of my season I actually irrigated for, which was quite often a bit bigger than that. But using that total season length, I worked out the figures in the last column, of which the highest is 7.8 litres a second over 229 days. I think I've made it suitable there for you. So what I say is that ECAM has the science, and now that we all have flow meters sending you data to you, you also have the data. Because originally, ECAM worked everything out at 30 days, at people extracting at the maximum amount for the whole 30 days. And in fact, and same with 150, you're extracting at the, say, 15 litres a second for the whole of the 150 days. And for most people with groundwater schemes, they don't extract, well, I can't get my 15 litres a second, and there's also time in the season when it goes down. So in reality, we don't extract for 150 days. We don't extract at the maximum rate, and also during the season we usually rain somewhere and we turn everything off, so we don't extract for the maximum period continuously. You don't want me to somehow say that all again, do you? Right.
No, I think probably
we get on to
we've got a good grasp of the problem.
Yeah, right. Now we're on the proposal.
We're interested in your proposal for solving it.
Right. For those, this is my proposal as I sent it to ECAM in my submission. For those with a groundwater extraction permit that were deemed to be not hydraulically connected using the 30-day rule, but will be using the 150-day rule, first, the maximum extraction rate at which they would be deemed to be not connected using the 150-day rule be established. So in my case, Originally it was 9.25, but now it's 8.9 litres per second. If their past records show that their average extraction rate over 150 days of the irrigation season, using 150 days as the minimum, or if you extract it for a longer period, then they use the actual irrigated, the actual time. If they they use the longer date anyway. I'm not reading that very well. Using 150 days as a minimum, or a longer period if they actually irrigated for a longer period. If the rate you worked out in those, which is what I did about 2 or 3 tables, is less than the 150 rule rate, which it has been for the last 6 years for me, then they continue in the future to be deemed not hydraulically connected. They can continue taking water at up to the 150-day rule rate, but with proviso that their future annual average flow rate figure must not exceed the 150-day rule rate. That's my proposal. I'll better carry on. I would like to carry on as I have in the past, starting with as much as I can without lowering the level too much, and then as each well dictates, gradually lowering the water take over the season. The perfect solution would be to retain the 30-day rule, but I gather that the rest of Canterbury no longer use it, so that option is probably not likely. But I believe it is only fair that those of us who are deemed to be not connected using the 30-day rule, but are using the 150-day rule, be given some consideration. After all, we all acted in good faith. Myself, I've done as ECAN has requested all the way through, and on the strength of that, I've spent $465,000 on irrigation capital expenditure. Now I face the prospect of having to put on restrictions 97.7% of the time that I would have been irrigated. Right, I think I've already said that, haven't I?
Well, that's right.
Yeah, before, in February of this year, ECAM put out a report with 15 authors. I've got it up the top there.
Yes.
And that was, I believe, for the benefit of the commissioners, so they can know what ECAM thought of my proposals, or our proposals. And so I've just gone and taken out the bits where I was referred to. And the first bit in red actually says basically what my submission has but just in different words. So, and I'd also like to point out I didn't
read this.
What?
We have read this.
You're right.
and you can give your answer to it. That's fair.
Yeah, that's my no, I haven't got to my answer yet. Now I'm getting to my answer.
Yes. You can give your answer.
The ECAN said we consider the introduction of a bespoke rule as proposed by Mr. Lundie is likely to be unworkable in a consenting context due to the likely variability in existing consents. I'm not really sure exactly what all this sentence means. I thought that the new rule that I am asking to be introduced is quite clear and straightforward, and the fact that all water takes now have flow meters collecting the data and sending it to ECAM means that ECAM will have the ability to constantly check that all are within the agreed limits. All that is needed at any time during the irrigation season is the start date, the running total on the start date, the season length, whether it be 150 days or the extra season length, and the running total on the day in question. In my case, as long as the figures arrived at is less than 8.9 litres per second, then I would be within my limit. I'm sure a very simple computer program could be written to automatically check this for all the consents daily. It is also suggested that Dan Clark could actually measure what our stream depletion rate actually was. Apparently, I didn't know that. So I've worked out all of mine on using the midpoint of 1,000 metres, 1,100, that's meant to be 1,100 metres from the river. No, 1,000 metres from the river. Well, that's the average of my 3 galleries. But all the flows indicate that the water comes from the west, and the river is at least two kilometres in that direction. And there is also someone, Zaror et al. 2018, who says the water in my area is actually running parallel to the river. So that would mean that I'll be even further from where the source of the river, where the groundwater is sourced at the river. And I'm sure that would work out a figure miles lower than what the 1,000 metre one would say. This is ECAM again. For Mr. Lundie specifically, the take could be limited through the introduction of a 150-day volume limit on his consent to ensure the average flow rate is at or under the 9.25. Well, that 9.25 should be 8.9 now, calculated to ensure the depletion rate is under 5 litres a second. I'm quite happy with all that, as long as the 150-day volume can be extended if the season is longer than 150 days. Let's put it very quickly. And then the final bit they had, well, second final bit, the outcome of such a volume restriction may allow Mr. Lundie a greater transition time. Now, that statement rather upset me. It allows me a greater transition time, but it doesn't say what I'm transitioning to. Seems to me the purpose of this whole submission is to have my take deemed not connected. It seems to me that if I can't get a rule changed, then my only option is to go to a 97.7% restrictions. Thank you. On my submission, I've put a wee bit more about how maybe my submission, my proposal should be worded a bit differently to include more farmers, but we won't go over that today. And that's it. Finished.
Well, Mr. Lundie, first I'm going to ask my colleague, Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, if he has some questions, because his questions are often of a pretty knowledgeable, technical kind.
Oh, he might be lucky, mightn't he?
Commissioner, any questions?
Thank you, Commissioner Shepherd. No questions for you, Mr. Lundie. You've set out the issues that concern you in quite considerable detail, and you've gone to a lot of trouble to show us photographs, etc., and a suggested proposal. But to the Section 42A officers, in reply, can you give us some policy and or rule wording options? Put your thinking caps on. There must be a workable solution to the issue that's been raised here, particularly where it would seem that in this case there's a minimal, to use your words from some of the other provisions, minimal effect on the actual river in this case. So have a think, see if you can come up with some options for us to look at, and then we can consider that in reply. And Mr. Lundie, that just means that you've made your case well, and I've asked the officers to think about it some more and come back to us further on that.
Okay.
Thank you. But no questions of you directly.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
So, Mr. Lundie, you've gone to considerable trouble.
Well, my livelihood depends on it.
Of course. And you've presented a splendid, clear explanation of what you've experienced, and you've illustrated it with numerous photos and all sorts of other reasoning. And what you've done that's particularly commendable, on top of all of that, is that you've presented your constructive proposal for addressing it. So we're really very grateful to you for all the preparation you've gone through and for coming in today and presenting it to us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Now, the next submission that we'd like to hear this afternoon is the submission from Springfield Partnership. Mr. and Mrs. Goodwin, is it? Are they present today?
Yes, they're here. They're just coming down now.
Yes. So Springfield Partnership is just a family company. Sue and I are the two directors. So really the submission is from ourselves.
Well, thank you very much for coming in to explain it to us.
So what information do you have so far?
We have got your submission that you put in, and you've obviously taken some trouble because you've explained it quite clearly there. But we assume that you've come in because you wanted to explain it further to us, and this is your opportunity to do so.
Okay. So we first moved to Milford in 1981. So we're farmed close to the Milford Lagoon for the last 39 years. So there was 3 areas in my submission that I wanted to cover. One was regarding our consent on the Arakapara Creek. The other is the naturalness water body.
Yes.
And the other one is our other consent, which is close to the Milford Lagoon, but is not part of the Arakapara Creek.
Yes.
So, and I've also taken some photos. We had tried emailing them. We only took them this month, and they show what effect the sea has on the lagoon. We tried emailing them, but didn't happen. So
Right, but you brought them in for us. Thank you so much.
yes, yes, and it shows. So it shows how much the lagoon can vary just from day to day, depending on the sea. And they show how they were taken on the 1st of October, the first ones. The other ones are a week later. They show how the Milford Lagoon can fluctuate in depth by at least a metre from a high level mark to the low level mark. And this happens regularly right throughout the year. Often it happens more in the summer, when the flows are in the OP River are lower, which prevent the mouth opening as often. So under the present proposal, our consent on the Arakapara, we would not be able to would not be renewed when it came up for renewal. And our argument is that irrigation has very little effect on the Milford Lagoon. The main effect by far is what the sea's doing at the time, and how it can fluctuate from one week to the next. Have you got any questions?
Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, any questions about that?
Not about that. I do have a couple of other. Are you going to address us further, or do you?
On the Arakapara one, well, I was going to talk about also the boundaries of the Arakapara.
So in terms of that issue you've raised there, it's on your 5-page submission. It's on the 3rd page, and you raise the issue of the high naturalness water bodies, and we posed a question to the council officers about that, and I'm not sure if you were here first thing this morning, but they've put some written answers into our questions, and they've put forward for us to consider as an option a new rule that's designed to deal with that issue of the high naturalness water bodies and to enable basically existing consents to more or less be renewed. So if you look on the council webpage, and it's called the second set of answers to the day one questions, you'll see there's some rule in blue words that the staff put forward for us to consider as an option for dealing with the issue that you've raised here and other submitters have raised as well. So just
Good.
let you know that.
Good.
So that's all on that. And you're going to talk next about the boundary issue. Is that
Yes,
right?
well, maybe we have got another consent, which is the only one it's the only consent that's on that piece of water that flows into the Milford Lagoon, not via the Rakapara Creek. It's via what they call a Pratley Road drain, and we would like to have the same conditions on that as what we're proposing for the Rakapara Creek. But
Yep.
they be renewed under the existing conditions. Yep. So we'll move on then to the boundary of the naturalness area. I've proposed that it go as far as the junction of the Burt Creek and the Rakapara Creek, rather than using the Rakapara Island Road as the boundary.
Yep. And so no questions for you on that, but again to the officers in reply, can you just address the specific issue that's been raised here and just comment on the issue raised regarding the appropriate location of the boundary? So what that means is at the end of the hearing, the officers do another report to us based on what's happened during the hearing. And so
Okay.
I've asked them to come back to us to address further the issue that you've raised here.
Okay, then, rightio. I've taken a photo of the boundary of that point where I'm talking about, and in the photo you can see that it's. Is it worthwhile me showing them it now? It basically shows the Rakapara. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, is there a camera so David can see it?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
So that is the
It's a very good photo, Mr. Goodwin.
So that is
because-
the Rakapara where it changes to the Burt Creek. To the left, there's a black line. That is the Rakapara Creek continuing up. So that, as you see on the photo, you can't even see it in the photo. It's that overgrown with just grass and willow trees.
Yep.
So
So if you can leave those photos with us, we'll have the officers scan them in, and then they can, if you leave them with Tavisha,
okay.
she'll scan them in and email them to Commissioner Shepherd and I, so we can have a good look at them.
Rightio. Okay then.
And you've numbered the photos, haven't you? I see there was a number on that photo.
Correct.
Maybe if you could just let Tavisha know what each number refers to, that would be helpful.
Rightio.
Then we can look at them when they come through.
Okay. Rightio then. There'll be further submissions on the Rakapara Creek, which we're also part of.
Yep.
So, thank you.
Now, just before you go, I just wanted to see if you can help me a little bit further on that first point of the high naturalness water body. So
Yes.
what you're saying is that you want to have some assurance that the consent that you've already got would be renewed when it expires. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
That's correct. Yes. Under the present
Yeah.
wording, that would not happen.
And we find that a lot of people have got the same kind of wish, that whatever they've got now, they want to have an assurance from the council that when the time comes that it expires and they need a new one, that they'll get the same. And there's a bit of a problem with that, because whatever changes there might be about boundaries and naturalness, water bodies or anything else, the whole point of there being an expiry of the consent is so that there's an opportunity for it to be looked at afresh in the light of the circumstances that then exist. Now, high naturalness water bodies come and go. There might be something entirely different then. And so I'm not sure that I can see that you can have what you're asking for in terms of a promise now about what a decision will be in the future. So I thought, well, out of fairness, I should tell you that I've got this problem so that you can respond to it if you'd like to.
Our situation on the coast is quite different than the rest of the river, because within a matter of hours, our fresh water turns to salt water. Nobody else benefits from the water below us. We're only a matter of, a few thousand metres from the sea. I think our case is quite different than what the rest of the river is, where it's flowing down the river and having quite an effect on any users or the actual river below. Whereas once it gets to the coast, it's basically going out to sea and not affecting anybody else. And the sea itself can actually come back in with those photos I've shown. By the effect of the sea pushing salt water into the lagoon, can come up to quite close to where we're irrigating from.
Yes.
In fact, one of those photos, it shows where our pump shed is, how the water will actually rise when the mouth is blocked and the salt water is coming over.
Yes. Yes. Well, thank you for that. Are there any more photos or any more remarks that you'd like to make?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for coming in, and we do appreciate the trouble you've taken in preparing for us, and also for your nice, clear submission. Thank you indeed.
Good. Thank you.
Is Mr. Campbell here?
Commissioner Shepherd, it's Tavisha. I haven't seen Campbell today yet. I did go out looking for him earlier.
Mr. Campbell sent us a very clear submission, and he had attached to it a statement of evidence of some case about the Mohikanui of 8 years or so ago, which I'd been having a look at. But if he's not here, I won't have the opportunity to ask him about it. I think the other one today that we have is Neil Kerr Limited. Is there anybody from Neil Kerr Limited present?
I've not had anyone come to my attention under Neil Kerr. I'm just going to whiz outside and have another quick look outside just to make sure there's nobody around.
Yes, thank you.
there's nobody outside, Commissioner Shepherd.
All right, well, I've marked that those two submissions, there was no appearance. Is that our business for the day, Ms. Fernando?
Yes, that is.
That is?
Yeah.
All right, well then, I'll take the point that we'll start again tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, and we've got the attraction of being focused on potatoes and other food, vegetables of all sorts of kinds, and I'm looking forward to that. So the hearing's now adjourned until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.